Namaste, hello, and welcome to India Global Week 2020 Revival, India and a Better New World. I'm your host, Priyanka Deo, reporting from New Delhi, and stay tuned because we have a session coming up. Now follow us on India Incorp, that's India INCORP on Twitter, and also if you have any thoughts, any questions, please using the hashtag #BeTheRevival on social media. With that being said, let's not waste any time and dive right into our panel discussion, General Counsel Enabling Success in India and Globally. Now, this discussion is a deep dive into legal perspectives when investing in India, including regulatory certainty and the importance of sanctity of contracts. Now, our panelists in this discussion will also address the legal and regulatory challenges in building business nationally and climate. For this session, I'd like to call upon our moderators, Ms. Babita Ambekar, Partner, Head of India Practice, DWF LLP, and Mr. Jigar Shah, Director, KKR India Financial Services Limited. Ms. Ambekar, Mr. Shah, namaste, and the floor is now yours.
I just want to set the scene by framing a broad reference point. Can India continuously produce set of ideas and plans of action based on the rule of law that can not only attract global capital flows, but also, just as importantly, keep those investors safe and happy once they've taken the opportunity to establish themselves in India. So I think that is a broad reference point. Thank you, panelists, for joining this discussion. Babita, do you want to take us to the first question that we have for the panel?
Yeah, sure. Well, look, I actually wanted to firstly set the scene. When we started to put together this panel, we were considering how we wanted to structure our discussion. And actually, one of our panel members, Nitin, had put together 4 tenets that actually impact whether investors choose to invest in a jurisdiction, whether it be India or globally. And I'd like to firstly invite Nitin to kind of share that with us and set some context. Nitin, could you put your speaker on?
My apologies. I just wanted to check if everybody can hear me.
Yes.
Yeah, I've been having some technical difficulties, so my apologies for that. Thank you, Babita. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, I guess, from an investor's perspective, Babita, there are many things that go into deciding where to invest and when to invest and why to invest. But when it comes to choice of a country to invest, I guess these 4 key sort of areas typically gets examined, and these are, in my experience, the resource profile of the country that one is considering to invest. And when I say I mean, sorry, it seems. Can people hear me still?
That was the investor calling out to you.
See, it already helps. So the first is the resource profile in terms of how scarce or how abundant resources that the investor requires in the country. Is it controlled? Is it freely available? The second issue that investors are looking around is around markets. How strong the market fundamentals are. Is the market sort of controlled by others? Can the market players be given freedom to sort of operate? Are the prices sort of freely determined? Demand and supply sort of works, or there are sort of artificial sort of fixers of price, etc. The third thing that any investor would look at would be the regulatory and the legal system. Is there sort of regulatory certainty? Is there rule of law? Is there the courts operating? Do we get sort of contracts enforced, etc. And last but not the least, the sanctity of contract. Are contracts honored, and if there is an issue, if there is a dispute, would that be sort of addressed by court? So those are broadly the 4 areas that an investor would look into when it's deciding on investing in a country.
Thanks, Nitin. Yeah. So let's move a bit deeper into each of those 4 areas that you very lucidly described. The first one being the regulatory certainty. So Gopal, if I may bring you in here, this is a question not just for making in India, but making India. If India be the key engine of global economic growth revival. Are you getting an echo?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm hearing it. So if India were the key engine of global economic growth revival, Gopal, how should we be thinking about policy making in the 21st century? How do we create a policy making framework and a model that inculcates policy making habit that leads to high certainty, low ambiguity, and maximizes returns in terms of economic outcomes? So in a sense, the real question is a question that I wanted to ask Ashok about time value of money and getting policy right sooner rather than later without unwarranted iterations. Gopal.
Yes. Thank you, Jigar. I think a good policy or a good regulation is like a good recipe. It should be tasty, juicy, delicious, and have a long-lasting effect. Now, the single most important thing about policy is it reflects the vision. Now, am I audible? Has the echo gone?
Yes, it's fine.
Yes. So it's like a vision document which the government creates for investors and for players in a sector in order to give them a clear indication of what its goals, targets, and objectives are, and broadly in drawing up a roadmap as to how it will be achieved. Now, primarily from an investor perspective, I think the important thing is that will this regulation or policy be long-lasting, whether it will be durable, and whether it comes with support and consensus across the board, so that once they take a decision and plan their business affairs, they know that for a long period of time, the policy is there to stay. Second, and I believe in this very strongly, that the whole culture has to be one which is enabling, supportive. So businesses do business, but policy and regulation provides a framework and a level playing field for businesses to thrive. And third, and most importantly, that the Indian legal system recognizes legal certainty as a very important facet of the rule of law. The Supreme Court of India, in the famous Vodafone case, actually reiterated this principle and said it's very important for business to be able to plan effectively, that you must have predictability, stability, and certainty, all, as I said, of long-lasting value. So for investors getting their return and ensuring that the investment is viable, Indian policy must be like a magnet which attracts them, embraces them, and they want to take the flight of investment into India happily and willingly. And the government of India and the Prime Minister have often said that India will put out the red carpet for them. There would be a reception, so to put it. And one of the ways of making this reception very effective is to have a single window where investors, all their issues, concerns can be addressed. And over a period of time, almost like having an investment commission and a law which secures and protects investment, will ensure that their confidence of coming to India, as opposed to going to some other country, will be there. And lastly, Indian policy and regulation must be goal-based, principle-based, methodology-based, looking at global best practices, because as the theme of this thing, of the conference, of revival and being part of the new world, it must seem like this trajectory as, let's say, Singapore, which is extremely business-friendly. So in the next round, where investment will be scarce, we must be so attractive to investors that policy, regulation, and the legal system must act in unison in national interest as institutions of governance, which will inspire and instill confidence and sentiment. And I think that's probably the most important message that I'd like to give through this particular conference. And the ease of business, which the government has said, will truly be ease of business when businesses are able to implement on the ground their plans, execute them, and reap the returns and rewards, which is expected, promised, and assured. So having the script and sticking to the script, like having a good soil and good turf, which will be nourishing and healing, is important, almost like holistic healing. So it has to be a package, a regulatory policy package and culture of continued support that the Indian government and policymakers will stand by investors and businesses during this period of time.
Thank you, Gopal. Okay, I'd like to understand a little bit more, perhaps from a sector-specific perspective on this subject of regulatory certainty. And perhaps I can move to Kaizad with respect to one of the highly regulated sectors, pharmaceuticals and healthcare. Kaizad, being the GC of Glenmark, I would like to understand to what extent regulatory certainty bears importance for investments specifically relating to the pharmaceuticals and healthcare sector.
Thanks, Babita. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah. Of course, as my earlier speakers have said, and also Mr. Ashok Malik has said that India has gone through a lot of changes in the past and very recent as well. And a lot of new regulations have come in, and really the government has been trying hard to bring in some amount of certainty. And regulatory certainty, of course, is a must for any investor, because that brings in some amount of confidence as to from a long-term perspective as well as from a short-term investment standpoint. Because particularly in a pharmaceutical sector, which is so regulated, if you are setting up a plant or you are investing large sums of money in any IP, acquiring any IP or patent or whatever, you would need to have some roadmap, some certainty, some direction that yes, what you have invested in will yield the results that you are expecting to yield over a period of time. We have seen, particularly from a pharmaceutical sector point of view, there have been a lot of changes that have been brought in, which have been very, very effective. And of course, as Mr. Gopal said, that there has to be certainty and it has to be long lasting. But the sector as such is so dynamic, there is a need for constant change. And, because things are moving, there is so much development, there is so much innovation that is happening. Therefore, sometimes some of these policies are not able to catch up to the new developments, new things which have been happening in the industry. But having said that, in my view, I think particularly in the pharmaceutical sector, if you see, there are marketing practices, and those marketing practices to some extent are very differently adapted and followed by different companies. Multinational companies operating in India follow some different standards. Indian companies itself, amongst Indian companies, there are different standards followed. There is no clarity over there in that space. There is something called as a uniform marketing code, and that code is voluntary in nature, and everyone is interpreting that code as per his and her requirements. So therefore, some amount of certainty and clarity is absolutely necessary from an investor standpoint. Coming to the next point is pricing of a drug. Pricing is very critical in India. As you know, most of the drugs come under price control. So pricing of drug is very, very critical for an investor. Even for an Indian population, if a multinational company wants to introduce an innovative product in India, it would want to have certainty that it will have a stability as far as its pricing is concerned. If that is not there, then that ambiguity is there, because of which a lot of companies would then shy away from bringing in new innovation in India. The next point, as Nitin pointed out, is enforceability of contract and protecting your IP. Under the patent law itself, you are given patent in India, but when you are enforcing that patent against any infringer who is infringing, there has to be standardization, there has to be absolute clarity in terms of that you will be able to enforce that patent clearly in India. If that ambiguity is there, then again that shies away investors from bringing in new innovation, new patents into India. And lastly, I think there are so many other regulations, small regulations which impact. If you are recalling a drug, if you are labeling a drug, there are so many small nuances which go into manufacturing and distribution of a drug. And there again, absolute clarity is required, because otherwise it disrupts the business to a large extent. So all in all, I would say, Babita, that regulatory certainty is very, very important and very fundamental for any investor coming in and investing in India.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So thanks, Kaizad. I want to pick up on the points you made on certainty and ensuring that ambiguity is minimized. So staying with the sectoral thesis, I want to bring in Arun here from a venture capital and private equity perspective. Can you talk about how Press Note 3, which puts an additional filter on investments from neighboring countries, has been received? And I think, just to be clear, we are not talking about the prerogative of a country to make policy which is consistent with its policy objectives. However, once that policy is made, and if clarifications are required in order to ensure that investors understand exactly what is how it's to be implemented, is really a question, and how Press Note 3 has created those kind of questions for the private equity and the venture capital industry.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. So I think I'll break up my response in two parts, Jigar. One is what has been the impact on the venture capital and private equity industry, India-focused funds, and the second is how have other companies in the ecosystem, right, startup companies, portfolio companies, felt the impact of PN3, right? And I'll start with some quick background or context. Venture capital or private equity funds are categorized or differentiated on the basis of their focus, where they are going to invest, right? And not on the basis of where they are collecting money from, right? In fact, venture capital funds, now if you look at an India-focused venture capital fund, you are actually presenting an opportunity for global pools of capital to be funneled into the best investment money managers and sort of invest in India. And secondly, these VCP funds are long-term investors. You're looking at horizons of 10 to 15 years in most instances, and there's a lot of broad-based global capital that comes into these funds. And really, when money is being raised, apart from checking legitimacy, etc., investors, VCP investors, aren't really focused on the color of money of which country it's coming from, right? Actually, if you ask me, the more the better at some level, and that's better for India because it increases the access to global capital. Then the other bit I'll add, which Mr. Malik also mentioned, and which I think a lot of people are aware of, is it's a bad year for India. So we could do with as much capital as possible, right? And not really place hurdles or constraints in getting capital. And the last thing is that VCP has been a great driver of growth for the Indian economy and the the startup ecosystem and the growth story. So if you look at it in that backdrop, having a blanket legislation which in the name of national security sort of questions any investment where any sort of potential Chinese investor could be involved, without adding filters and layers, either from a sectoral perspective or from a control or an economic threshold perspective, just feels very excessive. And what it does is it just lends a lot of uncertainty and sort of adds to a lack of stability in attracting capital to India. And that's a short answer from a VCP perspective. And I think the other part I wanted to touch upon is the focus for industry companies or the startups that have been raising capital from Chinese investors. And a lot of these are Chinese public companies, if you look at it, right? And if you just look at the past 4-5 years, Chinese capital, public Chinese capital, has been a great source of growth capital for Indian companies, especially the Indian startup ecosystem. Now, they are at a point where they desperately need that capital, but are unable to understand why they're not being given access to that capital. Now, if let's say you're I'll take ride sharing business or a food delivery business, is that the kind of business that you had intended to be covered by this legislation? Were you intending to not let foreign capital from particular sources come into these kind of businesses? I'm not sure, right? And that is why I think there could have been a more nuanced policy making and implementation, bearing in mind thresholds, economic criteria, and also perhaps sectoral criteria. And while thinking about sensitivity, could have been defense, insurance, or something like that, and that's a separate process, but not a blanket legislation.
Thanks, Arun. Well, look, we talked a bit about tech. We talked about Ola just now. Nitin, would love to hear your insights because, as we know, regulatory certainty is critical for tech companies. So, from your perspective, what enables success for new age tech companies?
Sure. Just double checking. Am I still audible?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. So look, I guess a lot has been said about regulatory certainty, Babita, and it's extremely important for pretty much every industry, every sector. But for the tech companies, regulatory, the role of regulations, a role of predictable, stable regulations is extremely important. And to some extent, the tech companies have a slightly different problem, and let me explain that. What typically happens is, if you see, tech companies are essentially attempting to solve simple yet complex day-to-day problems by applying sort of innovative technology and coming up with disruptive and creative business models. And in doing so, what they're doing typically is they're trying to build these business models at the back of, probably for want of a better expression, where there is regulatory gray. Often what the technology companies find is that the use case and the business that gets developed sort of extends to places where the original the law, statute, or the regulation is perhaps not even contemplated. They're not necessarily illegal, but the rules are not clear. So what typically happens in the tech space is that inevitably, world over, regulations are actually catching up. So a bit of a catching up on that. And the reason, as I said, is because either the laws are too dated, are missing, unclear, and therefore, after a certain period of time, when certain businesses have developed, I mean, look at India, look at pretty much every other technology businesses that we look at, whether it's food delivery, aggregators like us, fintech, you name the space, there is a need for the law to catch up. So I guess, once you're in a scenario like that, there is an extreme need for regulatory, what I call regulatory accountability. And what I mean by that is that I guess, the regulators should, when they're trying to regulate something which has already occurred for a while, where billions of dollars of investment have already gone in, where perhaps paradigms have shifted, where consumer preferences have shifted, where millions of employment has been created. In that situation, I think it's extremely important for the regulators to try and balance the convenience of all the stakeholders. And not necessarily look at a particular class of stakeholders who would be most impacted by the regulation. So I guess from a technology company standpoint, we always come up with disruptive, innovative technology solutions to simple problems. We expect the regulations to also be smart. We expect the regulations to also be innovative, and not necessarily tie itself to the law book, which were written when none of these were conceived. So what we're looking for is regulation which essentially is pro-competitive, a regulation which is pro-innovation, a regulation which is fair, which is equitable, a regulation which sort of, as I said, balances the convenience of pretty much all stakeholders. And world over, some of the good examples, and by the way, in India as well, and again, Ashokji mentioned, the Honorable Prime Minister mentioned yesterday, India has taken a lot of steps to sort of, not only revive from this crisis that we have in form of COVID, but generally to sort of, change the perspective of India as an investment destination. And I guess one of the things that really work is regulatory sandbox, which is now quite prevalent in the fintech space, it is also prevalent in many other tech space. So I guess that's one area where regulations could be experimented in a sandbox environment, and maybe I'll bring home this point by giving two good examples of how regulation actually helps and one place where regulation didn't help. Let's take our transportation sector, mobility sector, and the ride-hailing business that Ola runs. The principal statute is the Motor Vehicles Act, which the earliest form was in the 30s and the 40s. Then in the 80s there was an amendment, and very recently the government of India again did a fantastic thing of amending the Motor Vehicles Act by giving recognition to aggregators like Ola, which is by the way unique compared to other regulations across the globe where we operate. India is one of the only countries where our motor vehicles legislation have actually recognized an aggregator. Why do I say that's important? Is because the aggregators are actually different. We are not in the business of providing transportation services, whatever it may be said, believed, or understood. I mean, there is a difference. We are a platform where independent transport companies come and willing riders come to book rides, and there is a completely different service and a business model that ride-hailing companies like us operate. So India is one of the only country that or one of the few countries that recognizes in a more prospective way the difference of a transport service company versus an aggregator. That's a good example. Let me also then turn to something we all are used to. Those who live in India, we all know that in India vehicles have different color number plates, right? So if it's meant to be commercial, it's got to have yellow number plates. If it's a private vehicle, then it's got to be a white number plate. Now all of that goes back to our motor vehicle statute. Now we are also, for all of us who are in India, would have at some point in their lives ordered something from a food delivery system, and you would have noticed that somebody would have turned to deliver the food in a white plated number, white plated motorcycle. Now the business has been built over many years. The regulators had their knowledge about the fact that such a business has been built. Now the question is, if the regulators are now thinking of regulating this sector, there are a few options. The option is to stop it, to ban it, to prohibit it, saying that, oh, you know what, you've not followed the registration permits or the licensing plate permit, or think of something very creative, that how can we legitimize the use of personal vehicles for food delivery, because that has now become a use case, and that is something that billions of dollars have been invested, and something that has created huge amounts of job and well-being for the country. So that's an example where if regulations are catching up, then I guess regulations would need to really consider the balance of convenience of all the stakeholders.
Thanks. You spoke about the balance of convenience. So let me move on to the insolvency and bankruptcy code from that perspective. For banking and finance, the IBC was a game changer, and it played a critical role in changing the promoter and the borrower culture in India. Gopal, I would like to hear your views on what do you think the impact, Gopal, what do you think will be the impact of the temporary freeze of IBC, and whether that is likely to inadvertently, permanently damage the edifice that we've created in the form of IBC?
Well, firstly, as you rightly said, it was one of those big ticket transformational paradigm shifts by way of economic legislation, which was brought about. And it has been fairly successful because, for one simple reason, if you looked at the top 12 companies which were chosen and handpicked by the RBI to go under the IBC process, the banks and the financial creditors saw a huge amount of money which would otherwise not have come. And big ticket promoters also experienced for the first time in India, you could lose your marquee company. A company with your name could actually go to somebody else. It was a reality. It has happened. So I think it was a very important, my word, Lakshman Rekha we crossed, that yes, it is possible to have a very successful piece of economic legislation. And B, one important aspect of this, that largely it was driven by what is called commercial considerations or commercial wisdom of people who are financial creditors who take a decision. So instead of being court-centric, it was largely driven by what is called a COC, which consists of all the secured financial creditors, and they took a decision. That's why it was economic in its flavor and sent out a very strong signal that if you're a defaulter, you're a borrower, you're a chronic non-payer, the system will only catch up with you, you will lose your company, but in order to maximize assets and for keeping entrepreneurship going, you will get somebody who will come, take over and run the company. Very, very strong signal. And the Supreme Court also, a series of judgments, very quickly upheld the IBC and various provisions, so it became a very potent force. Now, unfortunately, this COVID came, and I would have thought that instead of putting the entire legislation in suspended animation or in comatose, you could provide a period like a moratorium or something, or case by case or case specific relief. The moment you suspend this new culture which had come, as you rightly said, redefining the relationship between lenders and borrowers or promoters and lenders, it is very possible over 6 months or 1 year, because we don't know if it will come back and when it will come back, but at least for 6 months it's there. Whether we drift back to the old culture, and as you know, we are no short of borrowers here. They also constitute a large percentage of the population and perhaps more after the COVID. I don't want to have too much of a break between something which was moving quite well, and the moment you put shackles on, you can easily fall back to the old culture of thinking, and one never knows whether this comes back. So according to me, that doesn't augur well. And then you have to take recourse to existing mechanisms of security enforcement which haven't worked. So two things happen. It's a huge respite for chronic defaulters, not just for the COVID period, but even otherwise. And the more traditional means, forums of enforcing security and other means, that's so much away from a fast track IBC process, which was what I call a forward looking piece of economic legislation. So luckily, like we saw with the IBC, it saw many changes, amendments and regulations. This can still be revisited. And I think forums like this, if they send out a strong message, I think those would take it into consideration by the decision makers. It's not cast in stone. I think it was a very quick reaction to something which had happened. But I think we should certainly revisit this, because it was a well-oiled machinery. It needs momentum. It doesn't need to be held back. And you can make some fine-tuning or changes to meet an existing current scenario. But it certainly shouldn't lead to the same situation of NPS defaults, people camouflaging the books, because there's no effective mechanism. So I think it had a lot of teeth. It was effective, and we should let the bite speak for itself more than the bark. So this is something I think needs some bit of revisiting, rethinking, recalibration, some course correction. And I think all the banks have also said the same thing, and they'll be even more affected now. And this also takes us to the point that if they're able to realize money, banks are recapitalized, there's that much more to lend, and liquidity is what is the need of the hour. Unless the banking system has money which is lending, it'll be difficult to resume economic activity full swing or fast track projects. So it has a much broader connection on economic development, business continuity, resumption, putting more liquidity in the hands of smaller or other businesses. So I think this has a very big impact, and it's something which is worth considering or reconsidering.
Thank you. Thanks.
And sorry, just to add one more thing, it's been recognized by the World Bank and everybody else as a mega reform. So I think once we've showcased it as a mega reform, we should allow that sentiment to continue. It also pushed us hugely in the ease of business ranking, because they always look at the appetite that the country has for big, bold reforms. So everything was auguring well. It was good on the report card, like a AAA+. So I think we should try and go back to that situation.
Thank you. Jigar, I'm aware we're running short of time and have just over 20 minutes. So I'm wondering if we can move to sanctity of contracts and then move on to the outbound considerations for Indian businesses globally, if that's possible.
Yeah, that's fine. So I think so we talked about certainty in regulation making. The other critical aspect of what Nitin laid out in terms of the four corners of safety is the sanctity of contract. And Gopal, I'm going to come back to you on that discussion which we had on IBC and policy making. India's risen up on the ease of doing business, as you said, but when it comes to enforcement of contracts, we're still lagging behind. We're in the sort of last quartile. So, what can judiciary do to make itself an instrument of good governance? And can we have a paradigm where it's not possible or easy for unscrupulous litigants to keep buying time and keep litigating and keep appealing, which actually compounds the judicial pendency issue? So how can the judiciary help in creating a commercial culture that needs to pay for frivolous litigation, and there's no strategic advantage to be gained for litigating?
Is that to me?
Yes, Gopal.
Yes.
It would be great to hear your views, particularly because you are a senior counsel.
No, I'm one amongst you, and I'm just happen to be in practice, more in practice. Not that you guys are not in practice. No, I think one thing I must say straight up front, that I think today the need of the hour is for legislature, executive, and judiciary to function as one team in national interest, all as institutions of governance collectively, because it's this collective effort which will help kick off the India from where we are at this point in time. Second, in 2016 or 17, we did come up with a Commercial Courts Act. But what we did do is to create a commercial environment or a commercial platform which understood economics, business, and finance within the legal framework. Now, every commercial transaction is recorded in a document. It sets out the respective rights and obligations of parties. All that is required is for the law and for the courts to enforce it as the parties have agreed. And if you look at Singapore or English law, all original power purchase agreements had an English law provision. The only reason was you got what it said. So if you went to a court, all that the court did was help parties to their bargain. So Indian jurisprudence has evolved a principle called business efficacy, which essentially means produce the result which parties intended. Now the question is, the courts must follow this scrupulously. And I have a little joke on this, that when it comes to cricket, the courts have always bent the law, because we have what is called equitable jurisdiction. And the temptation is to be a little more popular and see if you can mitigate some form of hardship, or if you can slightly fine tune or rejig the deal. Now that, I say, in a commercial transaction should not happen, because it is exactly as you people said, the sanctity, or what I call the integrity of contracts, is the integrity of the transaction, the integrity of the deal. So if a fund, a VC fund, a private equity or sovereign fund puts money, they should be sure that whatever is the mechanism by which they were to get their money back, that will be given effect to in full letter and spirit. So I think this is a single most important thing. The culture of compliance, enforcement, and adherence to the deal, and not the temptation to intervene because there is a power, or in order to make it a little more popular. So if we only follow a Singapore or a UK as business friendly, you get what is agreed. That will, I think, again go back to the point of predictability and stability. And I think the courts have such an important role, because they can send a good signal. And I'll give you a positive example of this. In 2016, we had a meeting where the Supreme Court, the Niti Aayog, and every big arbitration institution in the world partnered together for an event. The idea was exactly like contracts, how to make arbitrations effective. And if there was an arbitral award, what should the role of the court be? And the broad consensus was it should be supportive. So it should be supportive to the arbitral process and supportive to enforcement of awards. If you now go back to the next 3 years, most foreign awards, especially by Delhi High Court, were all enforced. A very positive sign that you will reap the fruits of your hard work, which is in an award. I call it the journey from award to reward. So the moment an award becomes like an ATM, it's the sanctity of the contract. What the deal guarantees, the arbitration ensures that the defaulting party makes up to the innocent party. So the arbitration culture in India changed. And it's exactly the same time now on the sanctity of contract for this mindset cultural change to happen. And if the courts rigorously enforce it, people will not breach or non-comply. But if they know that they don't do it, then it's like a toss of a coin. Let's take a shot. The court system takes time and somebody will be injured. At some stage, he'll bleed, he'll come back and I'll extract the deal. That messaging is corrected. That there will be a very swift action, quick decision, and strictly in terms of the contract, then this chances of people of non-compliance or breaching won't happen because they'll have a price to pay for it. So if there's a breach, the compensation should be equal measure of restitution, not as we do some reasonable degree. It's that arbitrage between what the contract says and what you may end up getting from a court, which boldens unscrupulous litigants to do it. And likewise, this whole culture of contractual, commercial, project-related issues being entertained in PILs, that should be an absolute no-no. PIL for the particular purpose, for the poor person who didn't have legal recourse. So if these lines are drawn, and Nitin has been in several industries, if you start interfering in airports, if you start interfering in mining, if you start interfering in power and telecommunications, then your core sectors are under stress, and that increases risk, and then investors are risk averse. So I think overall, the whole idea is simple mantra. Use your creativity where people need justice and there's injustice, and let the contract speak for itself. And that will again, as you said, push India further in the ease of business ranking because they have not really factored in sanctity. And New India should be, like with policy, forward-looking, pro-market, pro-contracts. The moment we are seen as these three things, pro-regulation, pro-policy, pro-market, and pro-contracts, I think the script will exactly be what investors and those looking, scouting for opportunities are looking at. So I think that should be the way forward on sanctity of contracts.
So I just want to ask a follow-up question on that, a short one, a hard one. You spoke about a national narrative. Is there a way in which that can begin? Is there sufficient discussion around this issue? And is there an easy way to start this process?
Yes, I'll give you one example. In 1999, when India decided to privatize telecom, government came up with a policy, and it was suggested to them, look, if you can place it before Parliament, not for its approval, it will send a strong message that the Indian Parliament has backed this reform, and that will send a strong signal to global investors and telecom operators to come. In the same way, if you identified your key sectors, I mean, let's say renewables is one big sector the government is looking at, all that you need to do is to have, as I said, a very favorable, supportive renewables policy. You can place it in Parliament. You can leave it to experts to formulate it. So the moment you do it, it adds value to that product. And the moment you have a valuable product, you get a lot of people who are interested because they know that this has been created by the best minds and it has the full buy-in and support. And that's why I said the moment you make a national interest policy, which is not based on states, players, but this is good for India, then you go from make in India to make India. And that's what being part of the revival is. You have to make India collectively, all institutions firing together, and that will be the majority voice then. And I think speaking in one voice will also be a very important thing.
Thank you, Gopalji. We're running, unfortunately, quite short of time. So I think maybe we can move on to the next portion of our discussion topic, which was really building India Inc. globally and what the current challenges are for Indian businesses internationally in the existing climate. So to that end, my first question was, in a post-COVID world, where we have increasing regulatory complexity, and that is combined with protectionist thinking, how does this impact the ability of Indian businesses to compete globally, especially in those highly regulated sectors? And I'd like to go to Kaizad on that.
So thanks, Babita. I think post-COVID is an unknown thing yet. You know, there are a lot of things, a lot of theories which are coming out today that how the industries are going to operate post-COVID. I was just speaking to someone from the hospitality industry, and that person mentioned that going forward, you know, if you are going to check in a hotel, you would need to then inform the hotel as to how many times you want the rooms to be cleaned, and you would be charged on those basis, so on and so forth. So post-COVID is an unknown sector today. Things will evolve, and we'll see how the situation will play out. But globally, I think from a pharmaceutical company standpoint, I think the things are, the Indian companies, particularly operating globally, there are a lot of challenges in terms of coming up to speed with the standards that are expected in some of those global markets. And there is more and more regulatory requirements which are required to be fulfilled in terms of, say, antitrust laws or data protection, and those standards really have to be brought up for a lot of companies operating abroad. So I think I don't know today whether one can comfortably say that we have all the answers post-COVID, how the situation will play out, but we'll have to see and course correct ourselves as we move forward. I don't know whether I've answered your question, but this is a brief answer which I can give in the interest of time.
Thank you. So, Jigar, would you like to ask the last question of the panelists?
Yeah, so I think Kaizad, we talked about the regulatory complexity in terms of post-COVID world, and for Indian businesses to compete globally. Nitin, you are a GC for an Indian company that has very successfully gone abroad. It'd be interesting to hear your perspective on that as well.
Sure. Jigar, am I audible? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, you are.
So I guess a lot is changing, with sort of, as countries and as economies get out of COVID. And I guess we still to sort of see where it all sorts of land. But I guess in terms of for technology companies and especially Indian technology companies, if I were to take a leaf from my colleague Bridge, who spoke yesterday in one of the panel sessions on emerging technologies, it's basically Indian companies, the prowess of Indian companies, ability to give cutting edge technology at low cost is already established. And there are many sort of sectors where the traditional sectors, they typically don't react to change that quickly as compared to how technology companies like ours react in the new normal that sort of every company, every industry, every country is getting used to. So I guess we have a lot of opportunity, and if I were to take sort of the mobility sector in particular, a lot is changing, right? So the whole, especially in the West, there is a lot of reliance on public transportation. Public transportations play a very critical part of the sort of the smart cities that we see in the West, and the confidence in public transportation, COVID and post-COVID era is dwindling pretty sharp. So I guess this is where a company like Ola and other technology companies can come into to sort of consider sort of micro mobility options, last mile connectivity options, and there are many Indian companies, including ours, who are at the forefront of that, where we can actually bring in a lot of change in terms of how life goes on and about in the world in the post-COVID scenario. In terms of the challenges, there are many challenges. I mean, I think, Babita, you mentioned about sort of growing sort of nationalism, growing sort of look inwards, protect yourself, protect your turf, protect your company. That kind of feeling sort of is consistent across pretty much every country now. But I guess what one needs to see when I think people need to bring in the experts to be able to bring the change in a quick and in a cost-effective way. And I guess that's where Indian companies, Indian tech companies, sort of play a phenomenal role. And I see this as a great opportunity. What is critical for international governments and international regulators and regulatory systems in such times would be to sort of again the same thing that I said, regulatory predictability and also regulatory collaboration, because often in these times you'll see that pretty much everything will have a lot of impact in terms of multiple wings of the government will have to collaborate to be able to bring a change. And when you have to do that, you need somebody to sort of be able to put it all. Let me give you an example. There is an example from a mobility space. If you go back to London, there has been concerns about drivers impersonating and safety of passengers, right? And that has caused the licenses for some of the people in this space. Ola, we have a solution which is essentially based on a simple technology which basically verifies if the real driver is actually behind the wheels, and that's a technology that builds on simple selfie authentication. Now, what we are realizing when we're trying to implement this in our operations in the UK, we are realizing that there is similar to what we see in our country. There's a bit of a tussle between different wings of the government. The data protection sort of the authorities having a particular view about the need to intervene into people's privacy versus the transport regulators wanting to ensure that safe and secure rides are given to customers. So there is a balancing that needs to be done. There is a solution available. There's a low-cost solution available, which India is willing to give to the world. And that's where I guess a huge opportunity exists for Indian companies and in particular post-COVID scenario.
That's great. Thanks, Nitin. That's fantastic to hear that. Finally, moving to Arun. Arun, you operate extensively in the US-India channel. So we'd love to hear your thoughts as to your perspective, key opportunities and challenges for Indian businesses.
Actually, I think Nitin summed up a lot of it very well. Babita, I think we're uniquely positioned. Indian businesses, what we are seeing, and we've been seeing it, I would say, pre-COVID as well, is that India is now building products and services for the globe, for the rest of the world. So we've moved past a point in time where India was just about being cost-effective, copycat version of a global model, right? We're now in I would say, a new world where the next Facebook, the next Google, etc., there is a legitimate, probability that can come from India. Right. Second, what COVID has done is COVID has now, at some level, shown us that being digital first, being sort of tech focused, is of paramount importance. So just by virtue of that, tech companies and digital first businesses are coming out as winners, or there's increased focus on them. And the last bit is that I think you still have a lot of capital available across the world, keen on investing in these kind of businesses wherever they are from, right? So that again provides a big opportunity. We're seeing companies which have a back office or a tech and engineering front set up in India, typical front office management, marketing in the US. These models are attracting a lot of capital from US investors saying, hey, this is a great opportunity, especially in a post-COVID world where you don't see that many similar opportunities, right? So that's, I would say, the positive. I think on the regulatory complexity and that aspect, I think I just leading on what Nitin mentioned. One aspect, for example, is immigration, right? Just take US on that front, right? There is so much talk and chaos around the immigration front. So it's not so while the opportunity exists, you are presenting a sort of a constraint or a hurdle for an Indian entrepreneur to think of doing a global business and moving to the US to set up the business, which works well for both countries, because of these, some other political sensitivities and a hot potato issue, right? So that I would say is a key concern, and how we sort of remove those constraints is something that's going to be super important in the coming months.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all for insights. Jigar, maybe you'd like to help sum up our session. We have 2 minutes. Love to hear from you.
Yeah, very quickly. I think thank you everyone. It was a great session. What we want to ensure going forward, I guess, for best outcomes, is we want to make sure that foreign investors, are welcome into India, and there are deep structural reforms going on to permit that. But from a policy making perspective, we want to make sure that those investors remain safe and happy once they're established in India. And it's very interesting to hear with the ideas of a national narrative and making sure that there's coordination between different branches of the state, the legislative, the executive, and the judiciary, to make sure that a sufficient national narrative builds up to ensure that everything is coordinated and there's certainty in policy making. There's less and less ambiguity, and we have the best outcomes. It's also interesting to hear, both from a pharma and an IT perspective, how Indian companies can offer global products and services that are relevant.
Yes, just to add to that, look, COVID has been a time of incredible uncertainty, but it does present opportunities certainly in certain sectors of strength for India Inc. And I look forward to seeing that journey here on. Thank you all very much. And
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you.
Namaste, hello, and welcome here at India Global Week. I'm your host, Priyanka Deo, reporting from New Delhi, and it is truly a global conference. As Manoj said in his video right at the beginning, prior to this panel, it really is a way, this conference is really bringing people together, and I'm so excited to be hosting this conference because of the amazing statistics that we're seeing so far. We have over 10,000 registered attendees across 69 countries, bringing the world together with current circumstances as they are virtually. And it just goes to show that where there's a will, there's a way. We can make things no matter what. So that being said, we're going to take a short break over here. We're going to have quite a few, I think we have just a few more panel discussions coming up. We have a very special conversation coming up. Your questions, your thoughts, I want to hear them. So please post them up on social media. Any pictures or any screenshots that you're taking, I want to see those as well. Post them up using the hashtag #BeTheRevival. I'll be checking them out myself and hopefully replying to a couple of them. With that being said, stay tuned here at India Global Week. We have a few sessions coming up, very special conversation coming up next, just in a few minutes here. Till then, this is Priyanka Deo on behalf of India signing off. See you soon. Namaste.